From a Hollywood film that sparked one of Stephen King's most infamous lawsuits to technology that would later power Grand Theft Auto, The Lawnmower Man's bizarre production history is stranger than its psychedelic virtual reality sequences. This 1992 sci-fi thriller featured everything from golf training motion capture to a Waco cult leader's favorite movie revelation, plus a prop CD that had nothing to do with the actual soundtrack. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about The Lawnmower Man. Fact 1. Stephen King sued 3 times to remove his name. The Lawnmower Man has one of the strangest origin stories in Hollywood history, and it all started with a massive case of false advertising that made Stephen King absolutely furious. The film wasn't actually based on King's short story at all, even though the studio marketed it that way. What really happened was that New Line Cinema had purchased the rights to King's 1975 short story called The Lawnmower Man, which was about a naked man who worshipped the Greek god Pan and used a sentient lawnmower to kill people. Meanwhile, director Brett Leonard and producer Gimel Everett had written a completely different screenplay about virtual reality called Cyber God. For purely economic reasons, the studio decided to simply slap King's title onto their unrelated virtual reality script and started promoting it as a Stephen King adaptation. When King found out about this deception, he was absolutely livid. The only similarities between his original story and the film were a single scene where someone gets killed by a lawnmower and their remains end up in a birdbath. That was it. King sued the studio, claiming they had maliciously tarnished his good name and caused irreparable harm to his reputation by falsely crediting him. The courts initially ruled in King's favor and ordered Allied Vision to strike King's name from all credits and advertising materials. But the studio refused to comply and filed an appeal. After the appeal, the judge ruled that the works were substantially similar enough to justify a based-upon credit, which was a partial victory for Allied Vision. However, the legal battle didn't end there. When the unrated director's cut was released on VHS and Laserdisc in August of 1992, New Line continued to defy the court order by keeping King's name on the back covers, which stated, "Based on a story by Stephen King." This forced King to go back to court a third time. The judge was not happy about the studio's continued defiance and imposed harsh penalties of $10,000 per day, directly payable to King for every single day New Line remained in contempt. Additionally, the studio had to forfeit all profits earned on the film during that entire period. Faced with these devastating financial consequences, the studio finally removed all references to Stephen King from future releases. Fact 2. David Koresh's favorite movie discovery. When FBI agents were reviewing surveillance recordings from the 1993 Waco siege, they stumbled upon an unexpected piece of information that had nothing to do with their investigation, but everything to do with Hollywood trivia. The tapes revealed that David Koresh, the controversial leader of the Branch Davidian religious sect, had listed The Lawnmower Man as his favorite movie. This strange detail emerged during the analysis of materials collected during the 51-day standoff at the Mount Carmel Center compound in Texas, which ultimately ended in tragedy when a fire broke out during an FBI assault, killing Koresh and 75 of his followers. The discovery of Koresh's movie preference became one of those bizarre footnotes in the case that investigators noted but didn't necessarily know what to make of. It's unclear exactly how or when Koresh expressed this preference, whether it was captured in recorded conversations or found in written materials, but the information made its way into FBI documentation and eventually became public knowledge. The film's themes of technological transformation, mind enhancement, and a character who develops godlike powers and sees himself as a kind of cyber messiah certainly seem to align in an unsettling way with Koresh's own beliefs about his divine mission and apocalyptic worldview. What makes this fact particularly odd is the timing. The Lawnmower Man was released in March of 1992, just about a year before the Waco siege began in late February of 1993. This means Koresh would have watched the film during the final year of his life, perhaps seeing something in Pierce Brosnan's cautionary tale about virtual reality and human transcendence that resonated with his own ideology. The revelation adds another layer of strangeness to an already tragic and controversial chapter in American history, connecting a low-budget science fiction thriller to one of the most infamous confrontations between law enforcement and a religious group in modern times. One of the strangest behind-the-scenes details from The Lawnmower Man involves a scene where the abusive priest, Father McKean, gets set on fire by Job's newly developed psychic powers. What makes this moment particularly unusual is that the technology used to create it came from a company that had absolutely nothing to do with Hollywood. The burning priest sequence was created using early motion capture technology, but not from a visual effects studio or animation house. Instead, the filmmakers turned to an Italian company that had developed their motion capture system specifically for analyzing golf swings. In the early 1990s, motion capture was still an emerging technology, and the equipment was expensive and rare. Most major Hollywood studios didn't have access to these systems yet, and the few companies that did were charging prices far beyond what the Lawnmower Man's modest $10 million budget could afford. Director Brett Leonard and his team had to get creative, so they started looking outside the traditional film industry for solutions. That's when they discovered this Italian company that had built a motion capture rig to help golfers improve their swing technique by recording and analyzing their body movements in three-dimensional space. The system worked by tracking an actor's movements and translating them into digital data, which could then be used to animate a computer-generated character. For The Lawnmower Man, they put an actor into this golf training motion capture system and had him perform the gyrations and movements of someone being consumed by flames. The digital data from his performance was then used to create the computer-generated fire effects that appeared to engulf Father McKean in the film. This same motion capture approach had previously been attempted for the film Total Recall, but failed to work properly. The Lawnmower Man became one of the first movies to successfully use this technology, proving that equipment designed for athletic training could be repurposed for Hollywood special effects. The fact that golf swing analysis technology ended up creating one of the movie's most memorable visual effects moments shows just how resourceful and unconventional the production had to be to achieve its groundbreaking computer graphics on a limited budget. Fact 4. The Celine Dion CD that wasn't playing movie props sometimes reveal amusing little secrets that have nothing to do with the story being told, and The Lawnmower Man has one of the strangest examples hidden in plain sight. In the scene where Job takes his first solo drive to the virtual space industry's headquarters, there's a quick moment where he slides a compact disc into the car's CD player before hitting the road. The music that plays during this sequence is part of the film's dramatic score, perfectly matching the tension of Job's journey as his character begins to transform into something more dangerous. But if you pause the film at just the right moment and look closely at the disc itself, you'll notice something completely unexpected. The CD that Joby puts into the player is actually Celine Dion's first English-language album called Unison, which was released in 1990. You can just barely make out the album artwork on the disc if you're paying close attention, though it requires a sharp eye and probably a high-definition version of the film to catch it clearly. What makes this discovery so peculiar is that the music playing in the scene has absolutely nothing to do with Celine Dion or anything from that album. Instead, the soundtrack continues with the film's original score, creating a disconnect between what we're seeing and what we're hearing. This kind of prop mistake happens more often than you might think in filmmaking, where set decorators or props departments grab whatever's handy to fill a scene without realizing it might be visible on camera. In this case, someone on the production team probably needed a CD for the shot and grabbed a Celine Dion album that was lying around the set, never imagining that eagle-eyed fans would eventually freeze frame the moment and discover the mismatch. The fact that it's specifically her Unison album makes it even more random, since Celine Dion and The Lawnmower Man couldn't be further apart in terms of genre or style. It's one of those delightful little accidents that adds an extra layer of weirdness to an already strange movie. Fact 5. Angel Studios became Rockstar San Diego. The visual effects company that brought The Lawnmower Man's trippy virtual reality sequences to life in 1992 had a future that was just as interesting as the film itself. Angel Studios, the small San Diego-based outfit responsible for creating the movie's groundbreaking computer-generated imagery, would eventually transform into one of the gaming industry's most successful developers, known today as Rockstar San Diego. Back in 1992, Angel Studios was a tiny startup with just 5 employees working out of an office in Carlsbad, California. The company had been founded in 1984 by Colombian entrepreneur Diego Angel, who had moved to the United States to study film in Chicago before relocating to San Diego. At the time they were hired for The Lawnmower Man, Angel Studios was primarily creating television commercials and the occasional visualization project for technology conferences. Landing the Lawnmower Man contract was a major opportunity that put them on the map in Hollywood. The studio's work on the film included creating some of the most memorable sequences, particularly the virtual reality environments where characters would race on spaceships, engage in psychedelic learning sessions, and even participate in what's considered the first virtual sex scene ever depicted in cinema. Their innovative approach to computer graphics caught the attention of major players in the entertainment industry, and the success of The Lawnmower Man opened doors for Angel Studios to work on other high-profile projects, including Peter Gabriel's music video for Kiss That Frog, which won Best Special Effects at the 1994 MTV Video Music Awards. The company then transitioned into video game development during the 1990s, creating games for Nintendo and Microsoft. Their work on the racing game Midtown Madness particularly impressed Rockstar Games, who offered them a long-term partnership in 1999. Just 3 years later, in November of 2002, Take-Two Interactive, Rockstar's parent company, purchased Angel Studios outright and integrated it into the Rockstar family as Rockstar San Diego. The studio has since created some of gaming's most acclaimed titles, including Red Dead Redemption and its sequel, proving that the small team behind those dated-looking virtual reality graphics had serious talent all along. Fact 6. 8 months for 8 minutes of CG. IY. When you think about groundbreaking special effects in 1992, most people remember Terminator 2. Judgment Day, which had a budget of $120 million and revolutionized computer-generated imagery. But The Lawnmower Man achieved something remarkable on a shoestring budget by comparison, creating some of the most extensive computer-generated sequences of its time with just a tiny fraction of the resources that major studios had available. The film's computer-generated effects, which totaled approximately 8 minutes of screen time, required a dedicated team of 7 people working full-time for 8 months to complete, and they did it all on a budget of just $500,000. To put that in perspective, Terminator 2 had 7 minutes of groundbreaking CGI that cost tens of millions to produce, while The Lawnmower Man squeezed out 8 minutes of effects for $500,000. The production team had to get creative with every single frame because they simply didn't have access to the massive budgets and cutting-edge facilities that the major Hollywood studios could afford. This tiny team worked with Angel Studios, which was just a small startup in San Diego at the time, with only 5 employees total. Michael Limber, who served as the animation director, later explained that the limitations actually forced them to think outside the box and develop innovative techniques that larger studios weren't exploring. The virtual reality sequences that audiences saw on screen, including the psychedelic cyber garden scenes, the virtual reality game segments, and the now infamous cybersex sequence, all had to be meticulously crafted, frame by frame, using the primitive computer graphics tools that were available in the early 1990s. What makes this achievement even more impressive is that the film featured 23 minutes of computer graphics total when you count all the effects shots, not just the pure CGI sequences. For a low-budget independent production to dedicate that much screen time to computer-generated imagery was practically unheard of at the time, and it helped establish The Lawnmower Man as a landmark film in the history of visual effects, despite its modest resources. Fact 7. Real VR, pioneer equipment as props. Most movies create futuristic technology using cardboard, paint, and imagination. But The Lawnmower Man took a completely different approach by using actual cutting-edge virtual reality equipment that was at the absolute forefront of technology in 1992. The VR headsets and full-body data suits that Pierce Brosnan and Jeff Fahey wore throughout the film weren't Hollywood props at all. They were real, functional equipment from VPL Research, a company founded by Jaron Lanier, the computer scientist who actually coined the term virtual reality in the first place. Director Brett Leonard had a personal connection to this technology that went back years before the film was even conceived. In the early 1980s, Leonard was living in Santa Cruz, California, where he became friends with Jaron Lanier and found himself attending parties with tech pioneers like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. One day, Lanier invited Leonard to an event called Cyberthon, a 24-hour technical competition where Lanier demonstrated his groundbreaking VR technology and introduced Leonard to the concept that would eventually become the foundation of the entire movie. The equipment used in the film included VPL's data suit, which was a full-body outfit covered in sensors that could track the movement of arms, legs, and the torso, and the iPhone, which was one of the earliest head-mounted displays ever created, though it could only generate 5 or 6 frames per second compared to the 30 frames per second that regular televisions displayed at the time. The entire VPL system, including all the computers required to run it, cost upwards of $250,000, making it completely out of reach for regular consumers, but perfect for a movie trying to showcase the future of human interaction with technology. Pierce Brosnan even incorporated some of Jaron Lanier's actual dialogue and technical explanations into his performance, adding an extra layer of authenticity to a film that was already pushing the boundaries of what audiences understood about virtual reality and immersive digital experiences. Fact 8. The Gemini Process, CRT Film Transfer. Getting computer-generated imagery onto physical film in 1992 was far more complicated than most people realize, and the Lawnmower Man faced a unique technical challenge that required an innovative solution. The production team needed a way to transfer their digital animations from computers onto actual film stock that could be projected in movie theaters, and the method they used was called the Gemini process, a technique that sounds almost absurdly simple but was absolutely cutting edge for its time. The Gemini process, developed by a company called Pacific Title, worked by displaying the digital images on a high-resolution cathode ray tube screen, the same kind of bulky monitor that people used for computers and televisions back then. The digital animation would be played back frame by frame on this special CRT screen, and then a motion picture camera would literally film the screen, capturing each individual frame onto physical film stock. Director Brett Leonard described it as essentially creating a digital optical printer, bridging the gap between the computer world and traditional filmmaking. Before the studio would even greenlight the visual effects budget, Leonard had to prove that this unconventional method would actually work and look good enough for a theatrical release. Working with Pacific Title, he created a blind test where they pulled young people off the street to watch footage transferred using the Gemini process. When the test audience said the quality looked comparable to Terminator 2 and Total Recall, two of the biggest visual effects blockbusters of that era, Leonard finally got his money approved. The process was incredibly time-consuming since every single frame of computer animation had to be displayed on the CRT monitor and then photographed individually. But it was the only practical way to get 23 minutes of computer-generated imagery into the film. This painstaking frame-by-frame transfer method represented a crucial stepping stone in the evolution of digital filmmaking, connecting the early days of computer graphics to modern cinema. Fact 9. Jenny Wright got sick from strobe lights. When actress Jenny Wright signed on to play Marnie Burke in The Lawnmower Man, she probably didn't expect that one of the film's most visually striking scenes would literally make her sick. The movie featured several sequences set inside virtual reality environments, and one of these scenes involved intense strobe lighting effects that were meant to represent the disorienting sensory experience of entering cyberspace. While these flashing lights looked impressive on camera and helped create the trippy, futuristic atmosphere the filmmakers were going for, they created a serious problem for Wright during production. The strobing effects proved to be so physically overwhelming for the actress that she couldn't tolerate being exposed to them for extended periods of time. Rather than pushing through the discomfort or finding a different actress for the scene, The production team came up with a practical workaround that allowed them to still get the footage they needed while protecting Wright's health. The solution was to have her perform only the close-up shots in the VR strobe scene, which required less time under the harsh flashing lights and could be filmed more quickly. For the wider shots and any footage that required longer exposure to the strobe effects, the production used a stand-in or body double who could handle the intense lighting without getting sick. This meant that viewers watching the scene would see Wright's face in the close-ups, giving the sequence the emotional performance it needed, but her body wouldn't have to endure the full physical toll of the strobing lights for the duration of the shoot. It's a clever bit of movie-making problem-solving that most viewers would never notice, since the editing seamlessly blends the close-ups with the wider shots. The fact that the strobe lights were strong enough to cause physical illness gives you some idea of just how intense the practical effects were on the set of this early 1990s virtual reality film. Fact 10. The director cut 40 minutes for theaters. When director Brett Leonard first finished editing The Lawnmower Man, he delivered a cut that ran nearly 2 hours and 20 minutes long, but audiences would never get to see that version in theaters. New Line Cinema's founder Robert Shea took one look at the extended runtime and made a decision that would dramatically change the film's theatrical release. Shea believed that many of the scenes developing Job's character were unnecessary and decided to slash the film down to just 1 hour and 40 minutes for its wide release in March of 1992. The cuts were extensive and affected the film's coherence in ways that became immediately apparent to viewers. Among the most significant casualties was an entire subplot involving Roscoe the chimpanzee, which had been featured prominently in the opening of the director's cut. In Leonard's original version, Roscoe escapes from the lab after gaining enhanced intelligence, and Job helps him before witnessing the chimp being shot dead by security forces. This sequence established crucial emotional motivation for Job's later actions and created a parallel between the chimp's fate and Job's own trajectory. When this entire plotline was removed, several callbacks and references to Roscoe throughout the rest of the film were also cut, leaving odd gaps in the narrative. Another major difference involved the character of Carolyn Angelo, Dr. Angelo's wife played by Colleen Coffey. In the theatrical version, she simply disappears from the movie after an early scene where she leaves to hang out with friends, and viewers never learn what happened to her. However, in the director's cut, her story continues throughout the film. Job eventually takes control of her mind, and later in the movie, she is actually killed by the sinister government agents. Her complete removal from the second half of the theatrical cut left Dr. Angelo's character arc feeling incomplete and made his emotional state harder for audiences to understand. The director's cut was eventually released on VHS and Laserdisc in August of 1992, just 5 months after the theatrical release, and many viewers who saw both versions agreed that the restored footage made The Lawnmower Man a significantly more coherent and emotionally engaging film. Fact 11. Matt Frewer replaced Jeff Fahey with facial reconstruction excuse. When it came time to make Lawnmower Man 2, Beyond Cyberspace, in 1996, the producers faced a major problem. Neither Pierce Brosnan nor Jeff Fahey wanted to return for the sequel. Brosnan had just landed the role of James Bond in GoldenEye and was moving on to bigger things, but losing Fahey as Job, the main character who transforms from a simple gardener into a digital god, created an even bigger challenge. The original film ended with Job seemingly destroyed in an explosion at the VSI headquarters, but the sequel needed him alive to continue the story. So the writers came up with an inventive, if somewhat ridiculous, explanation for why Job would look completely different when he returned. In the opening of the sequel, it's revealed that Job somehow survived the massive explosion that destroyed the building at the end of the first film. However, his body was severely damaged in the blast. According to the new storyline, Job was rescued by a shady virtual reality company called Virtual Light Industries, who had their own sinister plans for him. During his recovery, Job underwent extensive facial reconstruction surgery and had both of his legs amputated. This convenient medical backstory allowed the filmmakers to explain why Job now looked like an entirely different person and spent most of the movie sitting in a gyroscopic chair rather than walking around. The role went to Matt Frewer, a Canadian actor best known for playing the 1980s cyberpunk character Max Headroom. Frewer's performance in the sequel leaned heavily into that same twitchy, over-the-top energy, playing Job as an anarchistic, Joker-like villain rather than the twisted Buddha-like figure that Fahey had created. The change was so dramatic that many viewers felt like they were watching a completely different character, not just a different actor. Critics and fans alike panned the sequel, and it currently sits on IMDb's Bottom 100 list as one of the worst films ever made. The facial reconstruction excuse might have explained the casting change on paper, but it couldn't save the film from being a disaster. Fact 12. Pierce Brosnan became Bond right after when production began on Lawnmower Man 2, Beyond Cyberspace. In March of 1995, the filmmakers naturally wanted Pierce Brosnan to reprise his role as Dr. Lawrence Angelo, the scientist at the center of the original film's story. However, Brosnan had to decline the offer, and the reason turned out to be one of the best career moves he could have made. He had just been cast as James Bond in GoldenEye, which was filming at the same time, and this scheduling conflict meant he simply couldn't return for the sequel. Looking back, it was incredibly fortunate timing for Brosnan's career. The first Lawnmower Man had been a moderate box office success despite mixed reviews, but the sequel would go on to become one of the most critically reviled films of the 1990s, eventually earning a permanent spot on IMDb's Bottom 100 list of worst movies ever made. Instead of Brosnan, the producers cast Patrick Bergin as a completely different scientist character, while Matt Frewer took over the role of Job from Jeff Fahey, with the film explaining away Fahey's absence through a plot device involving facial reconstruction surgery. The sequel bombed both critically and commercially, while GoldenEye revitalized the James Bond franchise and made Brosnan an international superstar, launching him into a successful run as 007 that would span 4 films over 7 years. Only Austin O'Brien returned from the original cast to reprise his role as Peter Parkett, making the sequel feel disconnected from its predecessor in almost every way. Director Brett Leonard also stayed far away from the project, later expressing his disappointment with how the franchise continued without him.